Hi and welcome to part 4 of our Houdini rigging tutorial. In our last episode, we finished the head and neck and eyes. And in this episode, we'll be completing the left arm. And in the episode after this one, we'll be finishing the hand. The arm will have IK and FK with kind of a slightly automatic shoulder. We'll be giving the animator an option to turn that on and off or to determine how strong that influence is. In addition, bring up our parameters. The left arm will have display of both the proxy, the bones, the controls. It'll have, again, this actions section, which we'll come to later on in this series. The left arm IK will be able to follow the world or the center of gravity, the chest, the head, and I've even included the leg just to show how you can add different spaces. The twist control for the elbow will also have spaces, so it'll by default follow the world, but we can have it follow the chest or the wrist. There'll be an IK-FK blend, and when I move that toward the FK side, our IK controls turn off, but our FK controls turn on. The arm, both upper and lower, will have twist bones. You can see these small twist bones running down the upper arm and the lower arm. And in the next part of this series, when we do the hand, we'll hook up these controls to do this twisting. So if I rotate the hand, you can see that the forearm gives a nice twist. And then I can twist from the elbow as well, and even the shoulder. So that's what we'll be doing in this part. So just as we did in our spine and head, we're going to make some proxy geometry. And again, just so that you don't have to watch me do this, I've gone ahead and made it already. And what I've done is I've made a shoulder proxy. I've made a clavicle proxy just by stealing some geometry from one of our spine proxies, and a scapula proxy. And these are just rough shapes to give an indication of the kind of deformation that we're going to have. So by stealing some of this geometry from our spine proxies, I've had to go in and update the spine. So for spine 5 and spine 6, I just went in and updated what they were, the groups that they were bringing their geometry from, and then unlocked and locked this out node again. So now I have these geometries with holes in them. And so on the left-hand side, that hole is filled with the left-hand scapula, and this one, the left-hand clavicle, and this one, the left-hand scapula. And then when we are finished with our arm and hand, we're going to be mirroring them over to the right-hand side. And so we'll just mirror the scapula, the shoulder, as well as the clavicle and the arm proxies. So then what I did was make some proxy geometry for the arm, for the upper arm and the lower arm. And if you didn't want to put in those twist bones that I mentioned in the intro, this would be just fine. You could have left arm 0 proxy parented to the upper arm, left arm 1 proxy parented to the lower arm, and then you'd be done. In our case, what we're going to do is use the shoulder, and then we're going to use these little segmented proxies so that we can see that twist happening. So to start, I've turned off all of the proxy geometry for our spine, head, neck, and eyes, and I've turned on the original soldier geometry, and I've left the spine bones on just to give us an idea of where we are. And what we want to do is we want our shoulder to rotate in X, positive X, forward. So we'll just keep that in mind when we make this shoulder bone. So I'm going to go into the front view. I'm going to invoke the bones tool. And we want our naming to be pretty strict from this point on, because we'll be doing left side and right side, etc. We want to be able to give the mirror tool the best possible naming to make everything better for us. So I'm going to call this left shoulder, and we're going to have no kinematics. And the placement here is going to be freehand. And I'm going to draw the shoulder bone. It doesn't have to start at the top of the spine. It can be wherever you feel is best. I'm going to start it somewhere around here. And I'm going to end sort of below this little notch and deep inside from about here. That's probably where this shoulder would rotate. So just going to start, click, I think right about here. Move off and finish drawing. Now we got to find our little bones. And new nodes that are created in the viewport, they try to position themselves in a friendly way. They won't position themselves over top of other nodes. And so what often happens is that they'll appear at the bottom and sort of toward the right-hand side. So you can see I have a new bone, new nulls here. So let's just bring these out. Go in and change this, take the one off. This way I have left shoulder root and left shoulder bone. And then in the viewport, I'm going to hit escape to get out of the bones tool. Go back to perspective view. And I can see that this isn't exactly where I want this bone to be. And its orientation, if I go into the rotate tool, you can see that it's rotating in X this way, but I want it to rotate in X forward. So instead of moving the bone, I'm going to use the root and move it around and reorient it. So I think I want to do something like that. Now if I select the bone, I go forward, you can see that I'm moving forward in X and I'm doing a positive rotation here. So that's good. And again, grabbing the root, go to the translate tool. I think I want to go back a little bit and down a little bit. I think something like that might be good. Maybe a little lower. So we rotate this forward. Yeah, that should be good. All right, with that done, now I'll make the clavicle bone. I'll do very much the same thing. Go into the front view, invoke the bones tool. And again, as we saw earlier, we have these little blue selecting things. So if you find that, let's say that I wanted to start the clavicle in this area, but this guy was getting in the way, I can hold down the B key, and that just gets rid of them. And so I can now place this bone wherever I want. But in this case, I'm far enough away that it won't matter. And I'm going to make the clavicle slightly off from center, and then just follow this sort of ridge of geometry here. And I'm going to go up to about here. So, and again, our method is freehand. And we want to change that to clavicle. So, start at about here. Finish up there. Back in the perspective view, you can see that it was drawn. In freehand, it'll draw right along the origin. So just like with the shoulder, it pops itself way down here. So we have clavicle root, our left clavicle root and left clavicle bone. And again, escape to get out of the bones tool. Now I need to bring this forward. That should be good. We'll orient this in. So just so that it lines up along with that ridge that's there. Maybe down a little bit. So our clavicle, we want this to rotate in X, in positive X. So I'm rotating up and see that I'm getting a positive rotation here. So that is pretty good. Now we'll do our scapula. And again, you just want to get, if I do the front view, so that was space 3. But if in this view, if I hit space 3 again, you can see that I'm going to a back view. So the scapula, just going to draw it from about here, just kind of down and out a little bit. So back to the bones tool, left scapula, and again, freehand, and something like that should be fine. So go and find the null and bone, bring them up, Still in the Bones tool, hit Escape, back to perspective. And with the bone, grab the root, go to the Transform tool, move that straight back, just so it pokes out from the skin. And we can rotate this just about like that. I might want to put that, move it down like that. And then for the rotation of the scapula, I think we want, again in X, we want that to be positive out toward, so out and up in positive X. So that's right now going negative. So I could spin the bone around, or I could just spin this around. So I'm just going to put a 180 there, and then bring that back out, bring that around. So now if I grab the scapula, so now I'm doing a positive rotation in X. And it's perfectly fine to use these roots to reorient your bones. And the nice thing about that is that with this root, I've got all these crazy numbers in here, but you're never going to be animating with these root bones. They're purely for position. So if this is the position that you need that bone to be in, then that's fine. And then if you see the bone itself has nice zero rotations, and if I middle click, you can see that it has a world transform. It's got a -90 in its pre-transform, just because it's a little offset from its root, and that's perfectly fine. So next we'll do the arm bones. For building our arm, two things are going to be very important. One, of course, is the position from which we're rotating our bones. But equally important in any chain that's going to have inverse kinematics applied is that the bones themselves be very straight, or rather that they share a plane. And I can show you that very quickly just by drawing a quick bone chain. You can see that even though these are on an angle from the world, they share a plane straight through here. So when I rotate them, they're rotating exactly together on that plane. And the IK solver makes the assumption that these two bones are going to be in that same rotation plane. So it's very important that that be the case. So in order to do that, for our arm, we're going to use the construction plane. And you can turn that on just below the grid here. You can turn on construction plane. And that's this slightly darker grid here. Additionally, we can go in and turn on the construction plane handles. That will give us these arcs here. And then if we hit enter in the viewport, that will activate these handles. So now we can rotate this plane, move it around. So what we're going to do, rotate it a bit, bring it up to where our arm is. And we're going to do our best to rotate it so that 3 points of our arm where our bones are going to be, right here at the shoulder, and then here at the elbow, and then here at the wrist, that all 3 of these points lie along this plane. Because when we draw our bones will automatically stick right to this plane, which is exactly what we want. So I think slightly close. It takes a little fiddling sometimes, but every minute that you spend getting this right will be saved later on, because we want these bones to be just right. I think that's good. So you can see that I have that point on the shoulder, I have the elbow, and I have sort of mid-wrist. They're all on this plane. And we can slightly adjust this later. But for now, this is what we want. So I'm going to turn off the handles. And now, when I go into the Bones tool, and I change this to left arm, now what I can do Again, I'm going to hit B to get rid of these little dots, just in case I accidentally click on one. I'm going to go very close to the shoulder. Click there. And for the elbow, I'm not going to go to the middle. I'm going to go slightly back toward the this little bump of the elbow. And you can see that I'm changing my view here to get a better angle on my geometry. And that's fine because these bones, again, are going to be built on this plane. They're not going to have any relationship to our perspective. So now go to about the center of the wrist. Finish drawing. So now you can see these bones are right along that plane, and I can right-click, set construction plane, and go all the way down here to revert to defaults. And that'll just send it back there. And then we can turn off the construction plane and escape to get out of the bones tool. So you can see that I'm slightly off from my shoulder. We can fix that using the root of this bone chain. So I can move this slightly. It doesn't have to be exact. Just get it close. But now you can see that these two bones, if I rotate them together in X, they're going to rotate along the same plane. And that's exactly what we want. So I'm going to rename this left arm root. Take off the 1. Now that we've built the bones for our arm, we have a clavicle bone, a shoulder bone, a scapula bone, and an upper and a lower arm bone. We can start to construct our hierarchy over here. So I'm going to move the scapula out over here. I'm going to move the arm bones up. And whenever you draw bones in the viewport, you're going to get this root bone by default. And it will have keep position when parenting on. And so because I want the arm bones to be a child of the shoulder, I can just wire them together like that. And now when I rotate my shoulder bone, my arm bones are going to follow. I also want the scapula and the clavicle to follow the shoulder bone, but I want additional controls for each of these. And the way that we're going to do this is with our, if we go to our rigging shelf, our FK control. So I'm going to start with the scapula. I'm going to select the root, FK control. It asks us for a prefix. Left scapula root is what we want. And creates this stuff on top of it. But we can move this stuff out. You can hold A and just drag to rearrange those. So now I have our familiar control setup. We have an offset node, we have an auto node, and then we have an actual control node. But you can see that for one, the control is this giant circle. And we'll take care of that in a minute. But more importantly, the orientation of this control is not what we want. If we look at our scapula bone, we arranged so that it would rotate in positive X, going out and up like that. But this control, its positive X is doing that. So that's not what we want. So in order to align these, more specifically, in order to align this control with the bone, we're going to move this guy such that it inherits the orientation of this bone, and then we'll sever that connection. So to do that, we'll go to the offset, we'll turn off keep position when parenting. We'll make it a child of the bone. So now it has inherited the full transform of this bone, but it has some pre-transform stuff. So we can get rid of that by extracting the pre-transform. And then control middle clicking on translate. You can see that it removes that transformation. And then control middle click on rotate. And so now it has a world transform that it's inheriting from the bone, but it has no pre-transform and no local transform. So now it's in exactly the same position and orientation as that bone. And because the auto is inheriting that from the offset and the control is inheriting from the auto, now when we select our control, we can see that rotating in the viewport out will give us a positive rotation. So that's exactly what we want. So now we turn keep position when parent back on, and we can sever this connection. And now, because the position of these is the same as the root, we can take that scapula bone, we can turn on keep position when parenting, and make it a child of the control. and delete this root. So now we have a control for the animator rotating the bone exactly the way that we want. And now we can take care of this gigantic circle for our control, which is not what we want. And for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the pelvis, go inside, and if you'll remember, we built that little network for the pelvis that had a, it looks gigantic here, but it's fine. We'll steal this network, put that back there. We'll go over to our scapula control, can paste that in, wire the merge into the control null, or control SOP, go up, go to its miscellaneous tab. Instead of control type circles, we're going to go to control SOP input, and there it is. So we can go to the display uniform scale, drag that way, way, way down. Let's try 0.5. And then inside, we can go to our line. And right now it's pointing in negative Z. Let's try Y. No, negative X. And there we go. Make that a little smaller if we wanted. Let's try 4. So you can see you can do whatever you want here, but I sometimes like these little sticks. They're sort of unobtrusive, but you can also get at them from various places. So we'll do the same to the clavicle, and then we'll move on with the rest of the arm. All right, I've gone through and done the same for clavicle, creating a little control hierarchy that has the same orientation that we wanted from our bone. And now what we can do is we can go up and turn off our soldier body and start using some of this proxy geometry. So you'll remember that I built these shoulder proxy, clavicle proxy, and scapula proxies earlier, but I built them without these objects being parented into the hierarchy. So while I can take this scapula, make it a child of the bone, see this guy right here, you'll see that it kind of flings off into space somewhere. And that's because the geometry that's inside is locked in this node, and it was brought into this node before this object was parented. So the way to fix that, I can go back to the object merge, and you can see that it looks fine because it's re-importing into this object as soon as I turn its display flag on. So now I can control click the null, which clears out the geometry that's in it, and now I can relock it. And now that guy's perfectly fine, and it moves with the bone. So I can do the same for the shoulder. Where's our shoulder? There. Move that up to there. And the clavicle. Great. So now if we rotate our shoulder bone, see that that shoulder proxy follows along. And the same with the scapula and the clavicle. So now that we've done that, I can take both the scapula root offset and the clavicle root offset and parent those underneath the shoulder bone. So now our shoulder moves all of its bones that are part of its hierarchy. I can even go back, I can turn on our spine proxies, our head proxies, and see that that all works quite well. Now we can parent our left shoulder root into our spine. So we'll parent it to spine bone 6. And then we can bring back our spine controls. We can test out how our shoulder's moving with the rest of our rig. So if I select the shoulder control, so that's moving exactly how we want it. And rotate that forward. So that's great. Now we can start making FK controls for our shoulder bone, for our upper and lower arm bones. And you'll remember when we made our shoulder bone that we tried to make it so that it would rotate forward in the positive Z axis. But we also want to check and make sure that our arm bones do the same thing, and I don't think that they do. No, we've got a negative there, and on the lower bone, also negative. So we want to fix that, and the easiest way to do that is to select both bones, turn on keep position when parenting, then break the connections, select that upper arm bone, rotate 180 degrees in Z, and then clean that transform. We can hook that back up. And now when we rotate forward in X, we're getting a positive X. So we do the same to this guy, 180 degrees, clean the transform, we can hook it back up. And when we rotate him in X forward, we're getting a positive rotation. And if I middle click, you can see that we've got this pre-transform in here, but it's the same as our world transform. So that's all fine. And then we have a 28 degree R value in X, and that just represents this angle here, this little difference between the upper and lower bone. So all three of these, the shoulder and the upper and lower, are all moving forward in Z, or sorry, forward in X in a positive way. So that's exactly what we want. And now we can start making these FK controls. So we're going to start with our shoulder bone. And with it selected, we're going to use our FK control. We get a prefix, left shoulder bone, that's what we want. And that makes our little control hierarchy here. And because we started with this left shoulder bone, our control rotates forward in X in a positive way. So everything is consistent. So that's our shoulder control. Do the same to the left arm bone 1. Left arm bone 1. And it created this stuff on top of this stuff. Again, we can use A, hold over a node and just drag down. That will arrange those nicely. Bring those over to there. For the shoulder bone control, I'm going to do the same thing that we did for the scapula and for the clavicle. I'm just going to paste in that little network, hook that up to the control, go to the miscellaneous tab, choose SOP control or SOP input, and it's a little short, so I can go in and use that length parameter and just poke it just above the shoulder there. I think that's all right for now. But for the arm bone 1 and arm bone 2 controls, I'm going to stick with this circle, but they're both going to be much, much smaller. So I can bring those down to about there. And now we can parent these controls into our rig. So the control for the shoulder needs to sit above the shoulder bone. So I'm going to take the offset and I'm going to parent it to the shoulder root. I'm going to take the arm bone 1 offset, parent that into the left arm root. I'm going to parent the arm bone 2 offset to the left arm bone 1. So now when we move our chest control, getting all of those controls moving along with, and I move that one. Well, it's not going to do anything because it's not hooked up yet, but they're all in the right spot. Now that we have our controls parented into our rig, we can use these controls to drive these bones. And to do that, we're going to use constraints. So we're going to select the constrained object, in this case the shoulder bone. I'm going to go to our constraints. I'm going to choose blend, choose simple, keep position after, and now it's prompting us to select our target object, and the target object is the object doing the constraining. So that will be our left shoulder bone control. Accept that selection, and then we're dropped into the shoulder bones constraint network. can see the constraints set up. We go back up, we can go over and we can see that on the shoulder bone we have this little icon here indicating a constraint. We can see that Enable Constraints is on and the constraint network is specified there. So now when we manipulate our shoulder bone control, it should move our shoulder bone. And sure enough, it does. So we'll do the same thing for our left arm bone 1, constrain, blend, simple, key position after. Select the arm bone 1 control, accept that selection, we're dropped into that network. And go back up, select that, rotate, and it moves our upper bone, which moves our lower bone, and also moves our lower bone control. Now we can do left arm bone 2, blend, simple, key position after, select the bone 2 control, drops us into the network, come back up, and now rotate that one. And again, rotating all of these in X will be forward in X, which is exactly what we want. And it still follows our chest. Great. Next up, we'll build the IK system and see how we can drive FK and IK with just a single bone chain. To build our IK, it's as simple as returning to the Bones tool, and instead of no kinematics, we're going to change that to IK with twist. And we're not going to draw new bones. We're going to reuse bones that already exist by right-clicking in empty space and choosing Add Kinematics. And now we'll be prompted. I'm prompted down in my status bar. You might have yours in the viewport. I've moved it down here. It says select the first bone of the bone chain and press Enter to continue. So I'm going to select that left arm bone 1, hit Enter to continue. Then it says select the last bone of the bone chain. And this doesn't have to be a 2-bone chain. This could be a multi-bone chain if you wanted. I'm going to select that last bone, enter in the viewport. And now it's done a bunch of stuff, and I want you to sort of pause after you've done this to get your bearings. The first thing you want to do is get out of the Bones tool. So hit Escape in the viewport. And then you'll notice that we have a couple of new objects in our viewport. We have this box at the elbow, and we have this null here at the tip of the lower bone. That's the goal, and that's the twist. And then you'll notice that they're highlighted. And what the Bones tool has done is that it's highlighted the last bone of our chain. If we zoom out, you can see that it's highlighted this goal and the twist object, but it's also highlighted this kin chops network because it's put the IK solver into here. And it's selected all of these things. So the first thing I do after I've added IK is I escape out of the Bones tool, and then I click an empty space in my network, just so that nothing is selected. Because it's much too easy to accidentally zip over here and start moving stuff around unintentionally. So with that done, I'm going to take these 2 new nulls, bring them over closer to my bone. I'm going to rename this guy left arm bone goal, left arm bone twist. And it automatically gets this first part of its name from the bones that you've put IK on. So that's handy. So if I select this goal and I go into my viewport, and I use the translate tool just to test to see if my IK is working, you'll notice that it isn't. And you might be curious why. If you're just testing this on its own, it'll work. But we've done something to our bones. We've added constraints. And those constraints are still active. So the rotation of these bones is being dictated not by the IK, but by those constraints. So we have to go in and turn these constraints off in order to use the IK. So I've gone in to this left arm bone 1 into its constraint network. And what I want to do is put down a blend. So tab, blend. You can see there's a blend combine and then a blend constraints, and that's the one we want. Just going to put that down at the bottom of the network. So what do we want to blend between? We want to blend between the original position of this bone and this new position based on the constraint. So put the get world space in to the first input, and then the offset into the next. And we're going to move this output flag here. And then we want to add 1 to show that we have one new connection. So now we can blend between the result of the constraint or the original position. So I'm going to blend that off. I'm going to go up and then into the arm bone 2 and do the same thing. So I'm going to put a blend, get parent space or get world space with the offset, move that, add 1, and then blend that off. And what we'll do is we'll add into the interface, when we add our FK to IK blend option for the animator, it will drive the IK itself, but it will also drive these blends. So when the IK is on, these blends turn off, and when the IK is off, these blends turn on. But let's go test our IK and see if it works now. So I can select that goal again, transform in the viewport, and sure enough, our IK works. The elbow is spinning around a little bit. That's because the twist goal, or the twist effector rather, is sitting right at the elbow, and we don't want it there. So I'm going to select the twist, and it will be oriented right on that plane that we were talking about when we built our bones. So we want it to be somewhere behind the character. So I'm going to take this little red little chiclet thing, which says if I select this and move it, it'll move this object just on that plane. I'm going to move that back just somewhere sensible. And then since this is a control that the animator is going to use, I don't want them to see all of this garbage in here. So I'm going to extract the pre-transform. So now we get these translate values, which is fine because that's the position it's supposed to be in. But we don't need these strange rotations. There's no point in this. This object doesn't have any effect when you rotate it. So I'm going to control middle click on the rotate and zap that to 0. So now it's aligned to world space, and when the animator clicks on it, they get this nice translation, and now they can move it along that line and point the elbow where they want it to be. Now let's make some controls to drive our arm bone goal and our arm bone twist. So with the arm bone goal selected, we'll go to our rigging shelf, FK control, have a prefix, there we go. And we'll do the same for the twist. Now both of these will be parented to the master control. And then because they were created in the same spot as the control that they're driving, we can just parent them right in. And then we can turn off the display and visibility of our goal and our twist. And then for our goal control, we'll change it to a little box. And the same for our twist. There. Now the animator can use these. Our transforms are nice and clean. And now we want to create some space switching for these guys. So just as we did with the head, we're going to make some nulls. So what kind of naming convention did we use here? Camel case, all one word. So we can say, and then we can Alt click and drag to create a new one. So follows center of gravity, Alt click and drag, chest, Alt-click and drag. Head. Alt-click and drag, and we'll do left leg. Even though this guy doesn't have a leg yet, we'll hook this up later. And this is useful for times when your hand might be, maybe it's in his pocket, and so you want the hand to move when the leg moves. But for now, we'll turn this off because we don't have a leg. We'll do that later. So all of these, right now we're sitting at the origin, but we want to move them to the position of the goal. So just parent them. Keep position when parenting. Break that connection. And now the world, or rather left arm goal follows world. We want that to be a child of the master. So we go up there. Cog is going to be a parent of follows cog. Chest is going to be our chest IK. Head is going to be our head bone control. And again, we'll do the leg later. And now we want to control the space switching with a series of constraints. So we're going to do that on the auto object in our bone control hierarchy. So we come to our constraints tab. We're doing a parent blend. It's a simple full transform, and we're keeping position. So now we're prompted to select object to create parent blend constraint. So we'll select our auto, accept that selection, and now we're asked to select the new parent objects. So we'll select these in order. So world, center of gravity, chest, head. We'll do the leg later. Right click, accept selection, and that dumps us down into the left arm bone goal auto constraints network. And you can see that we have, again, like we had with the head and the eyes, we have a world, cog, chest, and head. And like we did before, we want to control these blend parameters with part of our UI. And we haven't built anything for our arm yet. We'll do that in a minute. But it will be very similar to control of the head space that we had before and of the eye space. So before we do that, we'll go and set up a similar thing for our twist control. So null, and we're going to call this twist follows world. Twist follows chest, and twist follows wrist. So these three need to be parented to the twist control, keep position when parenting, then break those connections. And then again, the world will parent to our master. Chest will go to the chest IK, and wrist will go to our goal control. And then parent blend, simple, full transform, keep position. Select the twist auto, right click, accept selection. It's asking us for our new parent objects, world, chest, then wrist. Accept that selection, dumps us down into the bone twist auto constraints network. And again, we'll have to drive these with our interface controls. But for now, we can go up, we can grab all these guys, turn off their selectability, turn off their visibility. Selectability, visibility. And now we're ready to set up the UI for our arm and then start promoting and hooking all of this stuff up. Something I should point out with our space switching, the constraints that we've added to our left arm bone goal auto and our left arm bone twist auto, they are currently parented to our world. So if I select these two, you can see that they're parented to the master, which is effectively the world. But if I go inside their constraint, you can see that this get parent space is the world space for these nulls. And in the blend, I have the parent space and then all of the ones that we've added. But we've added a world. So right now, these two are identical. And so when we drive these blends, if we drive this for whatever reason and it's off, and let's say these two are off and this one's off, but this one's on, we're still getting an influence from this first blend, which is the world space. So that may seem redundant, and in a way it is, but I like to have it there and just set it to 0 by default and just never touch it. What that allows me to do is to come in here and I can delete these or I can add different ones. I can play around and do whatever I want. And I've never lost that original one. So this blend will always have this original blend. And so if I do remove any of these or change them, I can always just turn this back on. And so that's why I've left it in there. So I'm going to put that to 0 because I'm using this one, this world space. And I'll do the same over here in the twist auto. So again, we have the parent space, which is in this case, the world. And then we also have a world here. So this first one, I'm just going to put to 0. At this point, with the exception of our proxy geometry for our arm, which we'll do when we get to our hand, all that's left is to create our parameter pane and to make sure that things are hooked up properly. I've gone ahead and done that, just so that you don't have to sit here and watch me do it. So, like our master, spine, and head and neck controls, for the left arm, I've created a folder, and it's a folder type of tab. And then I've created a geo display, bone display, and controls display. And I've actually made a slight mistake here. I want to start enforcing a naming convention for the left and right side. And that convention is going to be capital L underscore arm underscore. And I'm going to try and do that. See, I've done that for all of these parameters, but I forgot to do it here. And this will come in handy not only when we're mirroring our left arm and our left leg over to the right-hand side, but it'll be much easier for us to find these. They'll be much more visible like this. Houdini generally uses all underscore all one word for its parameter names. And this is fine internally in Houdini, but you and I are not Houdini. We need to see these things and manipulate them. So it's best to have something that's clear and visible and something that we can use in script so we can search for L underscore and find all of these parameter names. So having done that, I've created an actions folder, which is simple, and again, we'll deal with that later on. And then a left arm folder. Left is spelled out here because we're going to have a left hand folder as well later on inside this left arm tab. So I've created an IK space parameter, which has a menu for our space switching, and also a twist space with switching. Left arm IK FK blend, and then promoted the parameters for our left arm IK translation and the twist translation, the clavicle rotation, the scapula rotation, shoulder rotation, and then the rotations for our upper and lower arm. So you can see the parameter pane now looks like this. So we have our left arm tab, our display options, and then a little group box here with all of our parameters. So now we'll go through and make sure that all of these are hooked up and working properly. So we'll start with our proxy. Come through here and select our scapula proxy, our clavicle, and our shoulder. And again, go to that render tab. just drag this in. And we'll actually go and steal that little expression from our spine. Select all these again. So our expression was if this value, in this case, the geodisplay is 1, then 1, otherwise 0. So we can take this and replace that parameter. So now if left arm GDisplay is 1, then this parameter will be 1, otherwise it will be 0. So we can test that proxy, and then we'll be off on our deform. So that's working. Now for our bones, we can do the same thing. It's just straight channel reference there. So we can select all of our bones. We can go to the Render tab, turn on the display, drag that in, drop it, relative channel reference. And our bone display is off by default, but we can turn it on, turn it off. And now our controls. So we want our scapula, our clavicle, shoulder, arm bone 1, arm bone 2, twist control, goal. That should be everything. Go to the Render tab, Display, Controls Display, Relative Channel Reference. Great. For our IK space, we're going to do the same that we did for the head and for the eyes. And I'm going to go into this head bone 1 auto, into its constraint. You can see that we have the same kind of network that we had in our arm. I'm going to steal this expression, go back up and go into our left arm bone goal control, go to the auto, into that constraint. So we have these options. Looks like I already did it. I think I may have jumped ahead here. So I did exactly what I was about to do, and that is to paste that expression into each of these, and then just make sure that this parameter was changed to left arm IK space. And so now IK space is set to world, and that's a value of 0. So the value of 0 is coming in, so this parameter will be 1, everything else will be 0. And see if I change that to chest, everything is 0 except for this guy, which is 1. So that's hooked up, and I might have already done it for the twist. Let's see. Yes, I did. So I think I jumped ahead a little bit there. But you've seen this done already a couple of times, and so it's the same process. So our world is 0, so that's 0. I can change that to chest. That changes to 1. Everything else is 0. So that's working. So now we can check to see that our left arm FK-IK blend is working correctly. And we want to go up to our kin chop network, head inside. So kin left arm bone 1. And again, I've jumped ahead. So all I did to set this up was this parameter just dragged and dropped right in there. And so now this blend value will be blended between 1 and 0. So we can turn our IK off or turn it on. So going through this and just ensuring that everything was hooked up correctly, I realized that I made a mistake that I tend to make all the time. If you'll remember, when we set up our IK originally, turn on our bones again, we tested it and found, here it works, that it didn't work the first time we did it, and that was because we'd had these constraints on our bones. So the IK wasn't able to drive the bones. And so we went in to each of the constraints and we put this blend chop. And when you first create a blend chop and you wire something into it, the number of blends doesn't automatically increment. So even though I have two chops incoming into this blend, I have 0 blends. So you have to actually manually add blends. And what I do almost every single time is I only add 1, which of course in this case is wrong. I need to add 2 because one of them is coming from here and the other one is coming from there. And of course, that's what I did when we set these up. I just created 1. So you need to create 2. And then you want this one to be driven by the IK-FK blend, so that when the IK is on, this value is off, or rather, this value is off. So we're going to do that. So when the IK is on, the arm constraint is set to its parent. And when the IK is off, you can see that this went down to 0. We want this one to be set to 1. So the easiest way to do that is to take this blend 0 and drag it into blend 1, and then just negate it with 1 minus. So now this is 1, and if I turn on my IK, you can see that this blend is increasing, but this blend is decreasing. So now my IK is on, and this second blend is 0, so it's off, and that represents the constraint that we have on this bone. So now if I turn my IK off, the constraint is on, and that constraint is our FK controls for our bones. So that's set up correctly. And now we'll go up and into arm bone 2, and again, I only have the 1 blend. I'll add that blend. This guy goes here. This guy goes here with 1 minus. So now when our IK is on, this constraint is off. It's getting its value from the parent. And then when I turn the IK off, this value is 1, so it's getting its constraint from the FK control. So our arm is done. And as we discussed earlier on, we want to ensure that we've applied or accepted all of the changes that we've made to our HDA. Just saving a HIP file is not enough. We need to send all of this information that exists in our HIP file into our HDA so that all of those changes are reflected. And probably a good idea to start cleaning up our network a little bit. We can simply hold A, and you'll get this little sort of crosshair type thing, and just drag down, and that will line those guys up. And you can do that here, just to make things a little neater. And you might notice that our space switching nulls are, even though they're in the arm area, they're all parented off into other areas. And you might find that distracting. And it's perfectly fine to take one of these and say that this one is the head. We can put it over there if we want. I personally don't really mind the distraction, or rather I don't find it distracting. So I'm just going to sort of line them up nicely here. There we go. So in the next tutorial, we'll be building our hand, and as soon as we've done that, we'll create our twist bones for our arm and use one of the hand controls to drive that twist.